As many of my listeners know, my usual show formats have been in the arena of celebrity interviews and comedy. See, part of hosting a show where you let people tell their stories is a big responsibility. And today's show is a larger one. I first read about Clayton Miller back in September of this year, and I was immediately captivated by his story. I didn't know all the ins and outs, but the one thing I did know was that his story needed to be told. The story starts in a small corner of Nova Scotia, in a town called New Waterford, where then 17-year-old Clayton lived with his family. This is their story. Maureen Miller was Clayton's mom.
New Waterford's a small town. Years ago, it used to be well populated. We had coal mines. They're all gone. I'd say quite a few of the people here are now working out in Alberta. It's a town that is very much divided over Clayton's case. It's like a ghost town now, as far as the public goes, with people and jobs and businesses. It's gone.
So who was Clayton Miller, and why is his case still being pursued after 24 years? I found myself immersed in the story. Page after page, I couldn't put it down. We were practically the same age, and it left me wondering, what was he like?
Best way to describe Clayton was that he was a jokester. He liked carrying on. He loved being with his friends. Everybody loved Clayton. He was always smiling. He was very considerate. He loved animals. He was just an everyday teen.
He was an everyday teen, not unlike myself or anyone else for that matter at 17 years old. At an age when you're supposed to be looking for a job or what colleges to go to. Most people are starting a new chapter in their life. Clayton Miller, his chapter was coming to an end. You see, unbeknownst to his parents, Clayton made plans with some friends to go to the Nest, a hangout spot in the woods where kids would meet up, have drinks, have fun.
No, we didn't even know about any party. We didn't even know where the Nest was. We didn't even know there was such a place. And from what I know, Clayton had said he was going up with his friend Billy, and they were working on their bikes up there. And this would be New Victoria, which is quite a piece away from our home. And that evening, we had supper, and Clayton left around 6 o'clock, and he was heading up to Billy's place. And it was with the understanding that if he was going to spend the night at Billy's, he would call me.
Maureen never did get that call. She waited by the phone and figured maybe he just got caught up, got busy with his friends.
His curfew was at 1. When I didn't hear from him at 10 o'clock, I said, boys will be boys, and they're probably out in the garage and working on the bikes and lost track of time. So at 1 o'clock, when I didn't hear from Clayton, I phoned Billy's house, and Billy's mother said she hadn't seen Billy or Clayton, and it wasn't long before that she had gotten in from work.
Like any other teenager, Clayton was out and didn't check in with his parents. Something I'm sure we all did at one time or another. Maureen, however, continued asking and looking for her son.
She said Billy had said that he was going to meet Clayton at Dale's. So Dale, these two boys, Billy and Dale, are the two that supposedly found Clayton. And when I phoned Dale's, Dale's mother answered the phone, and she said that Dale was babysitting at his brother's place. So when I called his brother's girlfriend informed me that Dale was there asleep on the couch. She didn't inform me that Dale had been at the Nest that night, and he had ran to the bar where they were and was full of mud. He was a mess. Didn't say anything about where Clayton was or if they had seen him, nothing.
So why wouldn't people give any answers? Why wouldn't people offer up any information? Fear? Guilt? Just didn't make any sense.
This family has hidden what they know since day one.
And they still stick with that story?
They're not saying anything. We can't get the truth out of them at all.
The Millers have been searching for the truth for 24 years. On May 6, 1990, Clayton's body was found, face down in a shallow brook. Teeth were missing, one of his arms twisted behind his back, the other arm clutching at his throat. So it's 1 o'clock in the morning. You're calling around. You're trying to track your son down. You're trying to kind of piece together what happened that evening. When was the first time you got contact or confirmation that essentially something had gone wrong? Was at any point in time did you call the police after that?
Yes, we did. It was a little after 1. Dale McKinnon's mother, Mary, had phoned us back and told us that the Nest had been raided that night and maybe Clayton had been there. And we feel that she knew more than what she was telling. And anyway, my husband did phone the police, and we didn't know who it was at the time, but found out at the inquiry that the police officer was Wayne Crow, and he said that there was nobody at the police station with Clayton's description.
The officer Maureen was referring to was Sergeant Wayne Crow of the Cape Breton Regional Police Department, who has since retired.
The police never told us that Clayton was found. Mary McKinnon, that's Dale's mom, she had phoned the police after Dale and Billy went back and told them that they had found Clayton down at the Nest. Here, she phoned the police. She waited a while. She phoned them again. And she went out to where my husband works at the power plant to to get my husband. And she told Jervy that Clayton had been found dead.
Maureen, still not knowing the fate of her son, was waiting at home when Jervy got there.
And with that, Jervy left work and he came home and he thought I knew. And when he came in through the door, it was 2:15 in the afternoon, and he wasn't supposed to be off until 3. And when I heard the key in the door, I just said, thank God, Clayton's finally home. And it wasn't Clayton, it was Jervy coming through the door, and he asked me, was Clayton dead? And my words to him was, are you nuts? He said, is Clayton dead? And I seen Mary McKinnon standing behind Jervy nodding her head. I was a mess then.
How long was Clayton missing before he was found?
This would have been Friday night, and we can't even find out the exact time that Clayton was found because there's so many inconsistencies. What we have it narrowed down to is that the police knew approximately 4.5 hours before we were told.
By this time, most people would be wondering, how could you not get a straight answer from the police department? Why were the Millers being met with so much resistance? What people didn't realize about that time in 1990 was that the New Waterford police had a reputation for being particularly rough. By 1991, more than a dozen complaints had been filed against the force, ranging from allegations of verbal abuse to use of excessive force. Would you say that's the culture now, that people, knowing the history of the police department there, do you think people are afraid to this day, or do you think that things have changed at all?
Oh, I think it may have changed a bit. From what people tell us, they don't hear so much of people being beaten because of Clayton's case and this fighting. But I think it's still out there, and I do think that people are still afraid to come forward and tell what was done to them or what they know.
Before this incident, the Millers had never had any run-ins with the police department and really had nothing to fear. But it was clearly a different time.
Definitely. We had, the house that we're living in now, that we were living in when this all happened with Clayton, we had only been here approximately 3 years when this all happened with Clayton. And we didn't know much of, the business of what went on in the town because we had lived in Sydney, which is the city just outside of New Waterford. So the things that were going on here, that we found out later of police brutality, really blew us away.
Most families gravitate to small towns because they believe it's a better place to raise your kids. Smaller community, people knew each other. But this was a very different town than the one Maureen remembers.
I grew up just on the outskirts of town. And, when I was a teen and we'd be in town on Friday or Saturday evening, we weren't bothered by the police, but then we found out that in Clayton's teen years, they couldn't even stop to tie their laces because they were told by the police to move on. They didn't have, the kindness that was shown to us because we had police officers pass by us and say, have a good night and, stay out of trouble, whatever.
In an article by Gary Dimmick of the Ottawa Citizen, he reported at about 6:30 p.m., Clayton stopped at the home of a friend, Dale McKinnon, where with another boy, Billy Brushett, stole a half bottle of Captain Morgan's rum belonging to Dale's older brother. They passed it around for a while, then headed to the nest. It was later reported that an early arrival at the party noticed that Constable Darren Drinovs, an off-duty officer, was out walking his dog in the woods. He noticed the teens, but didn't ask them to put down the booze. Instead, Constable Drinovs testified at the inquest. He told patrolling officers Michael Abraham and Michael Cacchetto about the bush party, and then walked home. By the time Clayton and his friends arrived around 8:30, the party was in full swing. A bonfire and about 70 teenagers. Nearly every teen in town was there. But only after about 30 minutes, it was reported that Clayton said that he had had enough and was heading back home. As Clayton was getting ready to leave, the police were getting ready to raid the party in response to Constable Drinov's report. A resident who lived near the nest had told them about the underage drinking. New Waterford police say that, at the time, they hadn't raided the nest in more than 5 years. But some of the people who were teens at the time recall that the police had raided the parties there several times in 1990 alone. And that night was no different. Sometime before 10 p.m., at least 6 armed officers set out in cruisers in a police van to try to corral the teens.
This was a planned raid. So, there was police officers that were there that were on the force for quite a while. And then you had your rookies. There was a lot more police officers up there. Plus there were RCMP there. There were auxiliary Mounties there. They were all involved in this raid. And they didn't only raid the nest once that night. They raided it at least 2 or 3 times. They were there around 8:30, they were there again around 10, and they were there again around 2.
Details after this have been sketchy, but it was later reported that maybe Clayton had ran back to retrieve a hat that had flew off his head. That was the last time Clayton was seen by his friends. By this time, the Millers were frantic, calling everyone they could think of, trying to track down their son. They had even made numerous calls to the New Waterford Police Department, each time being told that they had not taken Clayton into custody. Later that morning, Billy Brushett was rolling out of bed at around 10:30. His brother Tommy was on the phone with Maureen, who had again called looking for Clayton. Half an hour later, Dale McKinnon called Billy, asking if he wanted to look around the nest. What was Billy's story during all this? Did he ever say, did he confirm going to the nest with Clayton, and did he ever come up with a story of his own?
Well, what Billy said, and he's still saying the same thing today, is that they drank the alcohol on the way down, and that Billy, he didn't go to the nest because someone there was there that he didn't get along with. So he thought there might be a fight breakout or whatever. But Billy went to town. And Dale and Clayton continued on to the nest area. And with Billy, Sunday, when Dale called him and asked him, let's go down and have a look around the nest area, and Billy said, okay. Billy, to this day, says that Dale McKinnon took Billy right to where Clayton's body was.
So it was almost as if he knew exactly where that body was.
Yes. And Dale was videotaped by the RCMP, and we're not allowed to see it.
Did they ever give any explanation as to why, or did you guys ever have any type of recourse with being told no?
We went to access the information through Ottawa, and because they're coming back with the Privacy Act.
It was later reported that Dale and Billy did find Clayton's body, lying across a stream, face down. It was hard to miss. Clayton was wearing a bright red sweatshirt, and the water was only ankle deep. Can you tell me about after they had located his body, and what were you told about the scene of where his body was found? Do you know why they never preserved that area?
Because I think it was all planned that, and my husband feels the same way, that any parent that's seen where Clayton was would pick him up and take him out of the water because his mouth and nose were immersed in water. Now you have to remember, when we had to get someone else to show us where to go to the nest, and because we didn't know where it was. And here, when we got there, the police officer, Wayne Crow, was sitting in the police car. He didn't even get out that police car to tell us, to meet us at the hospital. Nothing. Lisa Brushett and Charles Steele, the police officer hollered to them, is that the parents? And they said yes. He said, well, stop them. She said, you won't stop them.
And she was right. They couldn't be stopped. They had finally found their son.
Jervy and I ran to where the people were. And Jervy said, you want me to go ahead of you? And I said, yes, go to Clayton. And he ran, and I ran behind him. When I got to the top of the hill, I grabbed a hold of one girl to help me down over the hill, and she grabbed another. When I got down there, Clayton's left hand was behind his back. His head was facing to the right. His right hand, I thought his wrist was broke because his right hand was bent in a way that he was trying to take something away from his neck. His face was a mess. His cheek was a mess. His lip was split and swollen. His nose, we swore his nose was broken.
It's still a mystery as to what happened to Clayton Miller in the final moments leading up to his death. What was evident, however, was the condition in which the body was found in. Clayton looked like he had been badly beaten, with bruising around his eyes and forehead. His nose was out of place, and his body appeared to have had different types of mud and asphalt on it, almost as if he was dragged through different types of terrain. When Jervy attended to his son's body, he shouted to Sergeant Tom Dwyer to help take him out of the water in case he was still alive. But what happened next is still unexplainable. Sergeant Dwyer took Clayton's body out of the brook, but at no time was the area preserved as a crime scene. It was never cordoned off, and not one picture was ever taken with Clayton's body still there. So who would have beaten Clayton, and why was his body found in such bad condition?
With Dale is the one that went in the home and stole his brother's alcohol, and that's the alcohol that Billy and Dale and Clayton drank. And we believe that Dale's brother, Brian, he was upset because his liquor was gone, and he ran. I'd say he went down to the nest area, and he was in with these two people that we believe beat Clayton before the police got him.
A crime scene and its preservation is one of the most important parts of any investigation in law enforcement. It's where you're most likely to find evidence or clues as to what transpired there. When something of this magnitude happens in small towns, it's not uncommon for the RCMP to come in and handle the crime scene, and it was no different in Clayton's case. RCMP Corporal Jerry Tucker, who was in the identification unit, arrived to take photographs of the crime scene, and was immediately frustrated that the body had already been moved. All that was really left to photograph was the stream where Clayton's body was found, and his hat that was only 6 feet away from him. An autopsy was eventually performed on Clayton's body on May 7th, with an unprecedented 4 officers looking on. A Dr. Gianni performed the procedure. Did they, at any point in time, have any type of excuse as to why his body was in such bad conditions with the injuries and so forth? I mean, especially with the hand being up towards his neck, do you believe that he was that he was choked at some point, or?
We believe Clayton died in a police chokehold.
And tell me about that. Why do you believe that?
Because of the position he was found in. And when we went to see Dr. Gianni, this was right after he did the autopsy, he told us about his native Nigeria. And, you know, the things that go on there, and the police was in the chokehold there, and one of the things is it doesn't leave evidence, how they can do it. But he told us, he said, you have to have an inquiry. And what you have to do is go, you have a doctor over in New Waterford, because Dr. Gianni was in Glace Bay. You have to go to the doctor in New Waterford, Dr. Stevens. He's an MLA, and he can request an inquiry.
Dr. Gianni reported no major injuries or evidence of strangulation. He noted 3 superficial abrasions on the back of Clayton's neck and another abrasion on his right shin. He said Clayton's blood alcohol content was 120 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood, indicating mere intoxication. The legal limit for driving is 80 milligrams. He suggested Clayton had died from pulmonary emphysema, implying severe damage to his lung tissue, something that usually occurs slowly over years. The diagnosis would later be disputed by Nova Scotia pathologist Dan Glasgow, who said emphysema of that sort would be most unusual in a healthy 17-year-old boy. Dr. Gianni also told police that Clayton could have died from asphyxiation, perhaps smothering himself after an accidental fall into the stream, but he couldn't be sure. Again, Gary Dimmick from the Ottawa Citizen reported that of the 10 teens interviewed, comments from only 4 appeared in the police notes that were drafted months later for the inquest. The notes didn't include actual statements, but rather paraphrased comments that portrayed Clayton as being staggering drunk after drinking a quart of moonshine, which clearly conflicted with testimony given by witnesses at the inquest, who said Clayton had been drinking rum, not moonshine. What was your relationship, and was there one lead investigator during this time, or did they ever call in any type of an expert to look over things?
No. They were very cool towards us. Anytime we wanted questions asked or answered, we'd have to go to them, or they'd come to our home. But it was at our request. They weren't forthcoming with nothing. They didn't want to see us coming at all. Still that way.
In the months that followed, and with suspicious evidence surfacing, the Millers were starting to believe that the police may have been involved in Clayton's death. On May 19, 1990, Billy Miller, Clayton's cousin, lodged a complaint to the Nova Scotia Police Commission that a New Waterford police officer held him in a chokehold and left him barely able to speak. Billy was found not guilty on both charges, being drunk in public and obstructing a police officer. Other troubling and eerily similar cases began to surface as well. Between 1990 and 1992, the Nova Scotia Police Commission investigated 15 separate allegations of police brutality, ranging from use of excessive force to beating suspects violently. After an exhausting 5 months, the Department of Justice finally appointed a judge to preside over an inquest into Clayton's death. It was during that inquest that both the provincial coroner for New Waterford, Jerry Roach, and the police appeared to have been deceptive with their investigations. Jerry Roach testified that there were no signs of a struggle and no bruising on Clayton's body. He was later taped by Jervy Miller and admitted that Clayton looked like, quote, he had a going over on his nose and face. As for the police officers who testified, they also conceded that their notes, usually meticulous in police work, had been written months after Clayton's death. The Millers were questioned about their home life and if they really had reported their son missing the day after the raid, and if they gave a proper description, which of course they had. Oddly enough, in the final hour of the inquest, the judge stopped the Millers' lawyers from making any closing remarks or submitting written briefs on the case, and just like the investigation, that was it. The inquest was over. In the weeks that followed, Judge Randall concluded, quote, "Based on the evidence presented at this inquiry, from all the witnesses and the supporting documentary evidence, it is my opinion that there was no culpable negligence on the part of anybody." With the inquest now over, the Millers were starting to lose their faith in the justice system. In another excerpt from Gary Dimmock's article, by July 1990, the Millers had persuaded the Nova Scotia Police Commission to probe Clayton Miller's death. They had faith in Commission investigator Ed McNeil, a retired Sydney police officer. But McNeil's report would never see the light of day. The Commission halted Mr. McNeil's probe after 2 months, when the Mounties announced they would step in and investigate Clayton's death. Mr. McNeil retired a year later and died on August 20th, 1994. His notes on Clayton Miller's death lay unread until the citizen recovered them from his daughter's house. The secret McNeil notes dated November 8th, 1990 to January 18th, 1991 document a troubled New Waterford Police Department. According to Mr. McNeil's notes, several officers had been accused of police brutality. On November 8th, 1990, Mr. McNeil interviewed Deanna Bailey, who had been arrested during the May 6 raid at the Nest. Deanna told Mr. McNeil she saw a boy in a cell on the closed-circuit monitor. She thought it was strange because none of the other boys had been locked up. In her statement to Mr. McNeil, Deanna said the boy was lying on his side on a cot, with his head turned to the wall, away from the monitor. She said the boy's hands were limp in his lap, with no movement. Mr. McNeil wrote that he believed she'd identified Clayton Miller. Quote, "Fitting Clayton's sweater. She identified the sweater." This entry is significant because New Waterford police had always insisted they never saw Clayton on the night of the raid, let alone take him into custody. The McNeil file also revealed that the Nova Scotia Police Commission met with the Department of Justice to discuss suspending the entire New Waterford Police Department in the light of the brutality allegations. On December 11th, 1990, a few weeks before the Mounties launched their investigation into Clayton's death, Mr. McNeil told the Millers that New Waterford Mayor Gerard Marsh and Police Chief Doug Crow had called the Nova Scotia Commission, seeking to have Mr. McNeil's investigation stopped. They scheduled a meeting, but never showed up. Mr. McNeil also read the Millers a letter from the police union, urging him to stop his investigation. On January 18, 1991, the Nova Scotia Solicitor General's office ordered the RCMP to investigate the New Waterford Police Department on allegations from the Millers that the police had murdered their son. The Mounties concluded on May 14th that the New Waterford police had done nothing wrong and dismissed the accounts of those who claimed to have walked that section of stream where Clayton's body was found a day earlier and had seen nothing unusual. They felt the witnesses were confused or lying about the exact times and locations they had walked along the stream. Today, years later, those same witnesses insist they are telling the truth and that they were never confused. In the fall of 1993, the Millers finally gained government approval to exhume Clayton's body for a new autopsy. John Butt, a former Alberta medical examiner, would perform the autopsy, while Michael Baden, a former New York City medical examiner, would represent the family. Dr. Butt dismissed dry drowning as a cause of death and pointed to alcohol, even though Dr. Ike Gianni had earlier concluded that Clayton was barely intoxicated that night. He also said it was regrettable that Jervy Miller had disturbed the scene before a police photographer arrived. Dr. Butt simply believed Clayton died of hypothermia, that he had been drunk and not dressed properly for a freezing night. He concluded that there had been nothing suspicious about Clayton's death, and said it was regrettable that gossip had distorted public opinion. And as for Clayton's teeth,
I had taken Clayton to his dentist appointment just not too long before this all happened, and Clayton had perfect teeth, perfect strong teeth. And when I took Dr. Butt's autopsy report to Clayton's dentist and showed him what Dr. Butt was trying to shove down our throats, he was vicious. He said, "There is no way." He said, "You have to have another inquiry." He said, "And I am only too happy to testify about the condition of Clayton's teeth." He said, "But you should have a forensic dentist there also." He said, "Because there is no way Clayton's teeth fell out from decomposing." He said, "I don't want to hurt you." He said, "But I'm telling you." He said, "There's only one of two ways Clayton lost those teeth. It was either they were booted out or they were punched out, one or the other. They didn't fall out from decomposing."
Despite the irregularities, the RCMP would not reopen the case, and the Millers kept pursuing answers. They sent files to Louis Rowe, a renowned U.S. forensic pathologist who reviewed the case. He concluded without a doubt that Clayton Miller did not die of hypothermia. Dr. Rowe said that the boy's blood alcohol level was .12, not high enough to cause him to lose consciousness or control of his body. He noted that there was no major trauma to the body, and with the absence of washerwoman skin, swelling and wrinkling of the skin caused by a period of time in water. He said Clayton most likely died from being held in a chokehold or a sleeper hold. This hold, used commonly by police officers, leaves no marks on the skin and doesn't damage internal organs, but stops the oxygen flow. The doctor also said lacerations on Clayton's right leg and neck indicated a possible struggle in his final moments. Dr. Rowe went on to say, quote, "The body was probably then placed in the stream after the police and Clayton's two friends passed through the area on May 5th, 1990.
And then the other thing that Dr. Barton said was that it can't be dismissed. If the two boys that were at the brook on Saturday and there was no body, this has to be investigated. Clayton died elsewhere. But then you go to Dr. Rowe, that my sister-in-law had contacted back in 1998, and he looked at all the evidence, the pictures, the autopsy reports and everything. He said in order to say that Clayton died from pulmonary emphysema or dry drowning or hypothermia, the evidence has to be there, and it's not. He said what Clayton died from was a police chokehold, and the evidence is there.
Did that evidence ever make it to any inquiries or reviews for
No.
Clayton? It never did.
Where it went to was to the government of Nova Scotia, and they totally ignored it.
On May 5th, 2010, the Millers filed an access to information request for police documents relating to the investigation into their son's death. 2 years later, they were given 5 CDs filled with blanked-out information already within the public domain. Also in 2012, the funeral director recalled that the New Waterford Police Department released Clayton's body after the autopsy, and it was brought to his funeral home. Just as he was about to prepare the body for embalming, the police requested the funeral home send the body back to the hospital. After about 2 hours, it was sent back to the funeral home, with no explanation as to why. And just when you think things couldn't get worse for the Millers, they realized that Clayton's body had been tampered with.
And the brain was missing. He didn't elaborate on that. At the re-autopsy, Clayton's brain wasn't there.
So is it in your opinion that that obviously his body was tampered with?
Yes, there's damage there. So they were going to make sure that there was no brain going to be there if he was ever exhumed.
The Millers felt that they would never get a straight answer. Things started to look like a cover-up. Remember Dr. Ike Gianni, the first doctor to perform the autopsy?
When he did his autopsy in 1990, there were 4 police officers in the room with him when the autopsy was being done. 3 of those police officers were involved in the raid, and the other one was the detective, which no one's ever heard of before.
Were you ever given any explanation as to why?
No. None. And this is from the report of one of the police officers that was there. And then you go to Dr. Butt, who the forensic pathologist that our investigator hired, Dr. Bodden, he was there. Now, Dr. Bodden, he put in his autopsy report that Clayton's heart was dissected in a non-orthodox manner. Well, I called the investigator and I asked him what does Dr. Bodden mean by this? Because you have to remember, our investigator was in the room when the re-autopsy was being done. And he said, Maureen, it's like this here, Clayton's heart was cut to hell. And I said, well, why would anyone do that? I thought they were just supposed to take tissue samples and leave the heart. He said, the only time I've ever seen anything like that there, he says, to cover something up.
In 2014, nurse Kate Dwyer released 2 reviews of the autopsies performed on Clayton Miller. She wrote a scathing report, alleging that the autopsies were completely botched. And it was those scathing reports that finally got the attention of Justice Minister Lena Metlich-Diab, who has now asked the province's chief medical examiner, Dr. Matt Bowes, to re-examine the case. So what now for the Millers?
Right now we're waiting for the chief medical examiner, Dr. Matt Bowes. Kate Dwyer, who is a retired nurse, and she has experience in pathology. She has worked with the pictures, and these pictures, you should know, that when the RCMP came to our home, this would be right after this happened to Clayton, they told my husband and I there were no pictures, that they didn't take pictures. We only found out just days before the inquiry that there were pictures, so they lied to us right from the get-go. Now, what Kate Dwyer has done, she has worked with the pictures, and she was just like, You might see it on TV where they use ultraviolet light and not to see blood of a crime scene or whatever. Well, she did this with the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And she's come up with the gash on Clayton's, the left side of Clayton's head, bruising. There was dislocated elbows, which was in the autopsy report. Numerous things. Now, with Kate, she's also being helped with someone else who has a more powerful program, and he's found that Clayton's nose was broken and a number of other different things. His lip. Well, Liam contacted me and asked me if Clayton had a cleft lip, and I said no. And he said, okay, that explains to me that his lip was split. None of these injuries on Clayton are superficial. It's damage. And from what Kate says, is if Clayton had lived, there's a good possibility there would have been brain damage from the beatings.
So regardless if he would have survived or not, whatever happened as far as him getting beaten was severe enough so that he would have never lived normally again.
Good possibility of it. But where we stand right now is we're waiting for the medical examiner to come up with his results, and we take it from there.
As the Millers continue to wait for the next chapter of their son's investigation to conclude, they never miss a day of keeping Clayton's spirit alive. That includes Jervy Miller, Clayton Miller's dad, who for the past 21 years has carried a sign bringing awareness to his son's case and asking for justice to be served.
He started probably maybe 2 or 3 years after this happened with Clayton, and he's been gone out in every kind of weather, the 4 seasons, everywhere. He's been to Ottawa with the sign, all over this municipality with his sign, and he walks every day.
And tell me where exactly Jervy walks to.
He'll walk, there's a loop, we call it the loop here in town, and he'll walk the loop. Sometimes he'll go another direction, or if he has an appointment in Sydney, he'll go into Sydney with the sign.
So he's always making sure people are aware.
Yes, and the sign is always with him.
Do you think that there's ever going to be a resolve or any type of justice brought forward with your son's case?
Well, we're very much hoping that this medical examiner will be honest and tell what he knows.
What does that mean to you and your family to know that so many people have stood by and made sure to keep Clayton's memory going?
Oh, it means the world to us. I mean, for years, Jervy and I were fighting this alone, and you have to remember our daughter is involved in it now, but she was only 6 years old when this happened, so we kind of tried to shield her from a lot of the information and whatnot, and she'll tell you today she's still learning some things she didn't know. But to have over 8,600 people standing with us and the rally that was here, it really was amazing. The people were, coming out and saying, we believe, and we're behind you. And one of the things that I really like is that they let Jervy know he's not walking alone anymore. There's women and men that have, come and walked with him, which is great.
Not only is it difficult to keep the momentum and interest of the media going after 24 years, but also dealing with media who didn't even want to touch the story. Maureen, I also read that there was a lot of news outlets that were very interested in doing stories and featuring stories about Clayton and the corruption around the police department, but were subsequently shut down from doing those stories. Would that be an accurate statement? Did you have that experience?
There was a newspaper that was in B.C., and what I was told was he did a story on Clayton's case, and he contacted the 50th State wanting to know why the 50th State weren't covering Clayton's story. And anyway, he was told because we were stopped. And this was by one of the lady producers at the 50th State. And he asked her, who stopped you? And she said, the government. And when he asked who in the government, she said that I can't tell you. Now, we also know someone who was on the CBC Radio Canada board who came to us and told us that she is going to a meeting and asking why the Fifth Estate isn't doing the story. And she was supposed to have a meeting that December with the board. And here we had a snowstorm and she couldn't get out. But anyway, they had canceled the meeting. So she had called the chairperson of the board and asked the chairperson why the Fifth Estate isn't doing Clayton's story. And he told her, there's a moratorium on Clayton's case, and you don't want to touch that. And then we had Jim Holt here from the Hamilton Spectator. Now, our understanding was that it was Fifth Estate sent him down here to investigate, and the next thing, Jim Holt was gone back, and nothing was ever done.
He never came by for the story.
No. If this was just Joe Blow down the street that did this would have been dealt with long ago. But it's because it's the police. That's why it's not dealt.
Is that the culture of the police right now? Do they still carry that same reputation that as long as they are not willing to come forward with all the facts and all the truths of the story, that their reputation has got to be forever tarnished?
Oh, their reputation is gone. People don't trust them anymore. They might be still afraid of them because they're the ones with the badge and the gun, but people here have no respect for them because of what they did.
Every parent's worst nightmare is to lose a child. But how do you go on? How do you keep fighting every day?
Well, to begin with, we had Elizabeth, who was only 6 years old, and we knew that we had to be here for her. And the way that I dealt with it was, like I seen Clayton in the brook and whatever, but I don't focus on that. I focus on getting justice for him, and I just keep on saying to myself, stay focused. This is what we're looking for, and just keep on going that way. And as long as you stay focused, the truth will come out. And we still have our daughter, and now we have 2 grandchildren, so which helps us a lot, and we do have a lot of faith.
If you want anything for Clayton to be remembered by more than what has been put out in the media, what do you want to take away from all this as far as the memory of your son?
That we don't want Clayton to have had died in vain, that the people responsible for what was done to him get what they deserve, that they are brought to justice, and that Clayton does get justice because he deserves it. And Clayton did matter. Even though a lot of politicians, he's just another teenager and forget about him. Well, his family and over 8,600 people haven't forgotten about him.
The journey for the Millers has lasted 24 years, and they still seek justice for their son Clayton. They have courageously stood in the face of adversity and have never given up the fight. As a parent, it's hard to imagine the pain and suffering they have gone through and the continuous hurdles they've encountered throughout the years. Perhaps an example of one parent's unconditional love for their child. Perhaps a true example for the endless pursuit of justice. Eli Wiesel once wrote, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." Special thanks to Maureen Miller and the Miller family for allowing me to share their story. And special thanks to Gary Dimmick of the Ottawa Citizen. This story would not be possible without the article that he wrote. If you'd like to find out more and read up on Clayton's story, you can do so by looking on Facebook in the group Justice for Clayton Miller.